Hello and welcome to Dingoes Ate My Podcast. I'm Paul.
And I'm Dave.
And this week we are discussing the episode of Angel, The Girl in Question. This episode originally aired May 5th, 2004, attracting approximately 4.68 million viewers. Alrighty, so why don't we start with the number one song in America this week, Dave?
I wouldn't be surprised if it was the same one from last week. Or am I going to be surprised this week and it's going to be dethroned?
You will not be surprised. It is still Yeah by Usher featuring Lil Jon and Ludacris.
Always with the dance mixing musics.
Alrighty, and number one movie in America this weekend, Dave. Last week we had Mean Girls. Did it hold on, or did something dethrone it?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if it hung on. But again, it would just be the question of what would come along after that, and nothing is immediately coming to mind. Though it is May, and I'm not sure if it's the start of the summer movie blockbusters or if it hasn't quite bumped up to that yet.
I would say this would be kind of like the starting point for your big summer movies, yeah.
I don't know. I'll maybe stick with Mean Girls supposedly hanging on, but...
Unfortunately, it is not Mean Girls because that, from memory, is a much better movie than what it actually is. So this week, unfortunately, the number one film in America was a movie called Van Helsing.
Yeah, that was the thing that happened. I have very decent memories of that.
It did happen. That is a fact. It's just, unfortunately, it was terrible.
Yeah. Though my brain is kind of going into a whole big argument sort of section. It's like, it understands it's terrible for what it supposedly is, but it also is kind of that little bit of schlocky terrible that for what it did, it was definitely trying to do its best at the time, but then there were just things that they decided to do with it that weren't exactly great, but you can't really help that sometimes.
I feel like this was just a bad movie, Dave. I feel like you're giving it too much, I feel like you're giving it too much credit.
Yeah, I suppose that's one of my biases, just kind of coming in for it.
Yeah, I mean, granted, I haven't seen this movie probably since it was in theaters, so I might not be remembering it, but I remember it being pretty dreadful.
Meh.
And I was like 14 at the time, so...
Within all accounts, if it was in the right sort of mode for everything, especially for you, it probably would have worked. But also with your knowledge of other particular things, it could also be completely understandable that you probably wouldn't have liked it even in that time.
Yeah. So let us move on to video games, Dave. So we don't have a big week, but we have an interesting week, I would say. So, May 6th, so just the day after this episode aired, if you had a PS2, you could pick up a little game called Samurai Warriors.
Ah, yes. Possibly.
You familiar with Samurai Warriors at all?
Like, vaguely. It's kind of the case that it's technically a sister series to the Dynasty Warriors series and other particular things, but I'm not exactly sure what the difference is between the two.
Yeah, all I know is that it somehow connects to Dynasty Warriors, but anything beyond that, I'm like, I don't know. As far as I can... They look very similar to me. But this is coming from somebody who I don't think I've ever actually played one of them. And the other game we have this week, on May 7th, if you had a GameCube, a PS2, or an Xbox, you could pick up a little game called Future Tactics: The Uprising. Now, does this game ring any bells for you, Mr. David?
Only vaguely. Okay, seeing the box art.
I knew the box art immediately, and I was like, I saw this box a million times, and I never picked it up.
Yeah, kind of those particular cases. It's kind of a slight case that it seems vaguely familiar to another particular game, though it came out on the GameCube around the time of Battalion Wars. Whether or not they were similar within the gameplay style, I do not know.
This is a tactical shooter, apparently.
With, whatever the heck tactical shooter means.
So, like, I'm trying to think of like an example of it. What would be a good example? Like a Counter-Strike kind of deal, or like a Rainbow Six, those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
Something more like that. And apparently, according to Wikipedia, there was a Gizmondo version planned, which, Gizmondo. Do you remember the Gizmondo, Dave?
No.
Oh my god. Okay, so you know how everybody made fun of the N-Gage for being a taco?
Yes.
Let me introduce you to a taco. Look at the... Oh, Dave, this might be the worst thing ever.
Like handheld system, logo.
Look at the design of it. It looks terrible.
Give me a second, checking the links. Okay.
It sold less than 25,000 units, and the best-selling game was a game called Sticky Balls.
Well, you know how much you want your legacy to stand up. I'm not sure how well it could be with sticky balls.
It's... Yeah, they also released a version of this where like you could pay less and get one with like ads baked in.
Like, on the one hand, I'm not too surprised. And again, I'm not too sure just with the size of it. I'd have to do like comparison and whatnot to it. Like, just with a handheld system, I can understand the idea of what they decided to go with it. But unless I can kind of get comparison to something else sitting next to it, I'm not too sure it would be that ridiculous within my brain.
Yeah, I don't see anything. I can't, like, just quickly looking, I don't see anything about the screen size or anything. But from memory, I want to say that this had like... Oh, wait, here we go. It's a 2.8-inch screen.
You know, a little bit bigger than the Game Boy Advance Mini that they came out with at some particular point.
Is that like GBA Mini screen size? Because I think that might be smaller. Game Boy Micro. How big was the screen on this bad boy? Am I blind? Why can't I find it? It'd be pretty...
Seeing a little bit of gameplay of future tactics and the whatnot, it's understandable, but also kind of a case of this existed.
Apparently it did. But yeah. So the Gizmondo was a thing that nobody remembers.
Yeah.
And there's no reason for anybody to remember it because, you know, it wasn't very good.
Yeah, it's a thing that happened at that time.
It certainly is. So let us move on to our little haiku about this episode.
Oh boy, it'll be interesting to see what this comes up with.
I accidentally closed the browser, so I'm having it rewrite it. I'll see if it comes up with something different. That'll be good. It's... There we go. Okay. Oh, it did write a different one this time. Oh well, here's what we're going with. Immortals love game. Angel and Spike seek Buffy. She's already gone.
Like, somewhat understandable. Though mostly it might be a case of they maybe called up the actor to come in for supposed showing, but she couldn't make it, so it's like, she's in the episode, but only within spoken word.
Yeah, so just right off the bat, Buffy does not appear in this episode. And we'll get into more details about that later, but yeah. I do enjoy this episode because it is quite funny, but let's get into the plot here.
Oh boy, this episode.
Gunn discovers a demon gang war is imminent unless the dead leader's head is recovered from Rome. So Angel and Spike travel to Rome to retrieve the head. They find out that Buffy is dating their nemesis, the Immortal. Flashbacks are shown that explain why Angel and Spike hate the Immortal. He slept with Darla and Drusilla simultaneously, while his minions held Angelus and Spike in chains. They also discuss the matter and conclude that Buffy must be under some sort of love spell. Spike and Angel visit Buffy's apartment and find Andrew Wells, who is living with Buffy and Dawn. He says that Buffy went to a club with the Immortal. They go to the club and see Buffy dancing from a distance. They get distracted and leave the demon head in a bag on a table, which is snatched by the Immortal's demon butler. Angel and Spike fight the minions and accidentally hit each other a few times too. The demon butler gets away with the head and leaves. After arguing how they would be able to find the head if they had their resources, Angel and Spike go to the Wolfram and Hart offices. They are greeted by the CEO, an Italian woman. She says that the head is being held in a standard ransom situation. Angel and Spike are given money for the drop, which they exchange with the butler for the bag. They open it, and it is actually a bomb. 3 seconds from detonation. They both barely survive the ensuing explosion, albeit their clothing heavily damaged and the street destroyed. Also, Spike's coat that he got from Nikki Woods is destroyed, and he is not happy.
Yeah, it's a memento.
We'll get into that later. The Rome Wolfram and Hart CEO explains that they always use a bomb on first timers as a prank. Hell of a prank. And replaces their damaged clothing, including Spike's irreplaceable jacket. After being locked...
We sent 10 more to your offices in the States. You should be all good.
Oh, yes. As a prank, and replaces their damaged... Yeah, okay. After being locked out of her office, Spike and Angel return to Buffy's apartment, where Andrew tells them to let Buffy move on, saying that although she loves them both, they need to give her some space and move on themselves, or they could never have a chance to reunite with her. Frustrated by their inability to contact Buffy, and by the demon butler's chicanery on the Immortal's behalf, they go home, where they find the head on Angel's desk, with a note signed by the Immortal. Though outraged that he distracted them again while he put the moves on their girl, Spike and Angel realize that they do need to move on. Meanwhile, at Wolfram and Hart in LA, Fred's parents show up at Wesley's office, and he tries to tell them that she has been consumed, only to be interrupted by O'Leary, who looks and acts exactly like Fred. Later, while her parents are being shown Fred's office, Wesley confronts Illyria. She explains because of Fred's past memories, she cannot bear witness to their grief in addition to Wesley's, which she experiences as physical pain. She explains that she can appear in the form that she wishes. After Fred's parents leave, Illyria continues to appear and speak as Fred, which angers Wesley. She states that she wants to explore this relationship further and does not understand why Wesley is angry when he obviously loved Fred. He replies that she is not Fred and that he is sickened by the sight of her and orders her to never assume Fred's form again. She changes back to her usual form. She appears somewhat confused and upset when he leaves the room. So that was this episode.
Indeed.
So what did you think of this one, Dave?
Decently hilarious, though it's a mild case of... I believe it's a character, or the Immortal is a character that we've somewhat known within the Buffy series, because it was mild cases of, I recognize that name, or should I recognize that name? I'm not too sure.
So, no, this is not a character that has been brought up in Buffy. Okay, let me rephrase that, because that's technically not true. This is not a character that was ever brought up in the Buffy TV series. It is a character that will be mentioned in a couple of comics, but this character has never appeared in the Buffy series, and to my knowledge was never referenced in the series.
Okay. So it's just a case of it was, one, brought up within this episode to sort of build the story from there, and just to additionally add in some shenanigans of, there was a guy that they had to deal with when they were Angelus and Spike, going through all their particular stuff of someone that they want to deal with, but never could able to, because he was always about 5 steps ahead of them.
Yes, yeah. It's the character is basically created for this episode, and then would popped up a few other times in like a novel and in a couple of comics, but that's about it. I actually really wish that this character had been used more, because I love the idea of somebody who just constantly pisses off Angel and Spike.
It's always fun.
It is good, and forcing them to work together is very fun too.
Indeed, just with... I can't remember the specific trope name for it, but essentially just being like an old married couple with their history and all the shit that they've gone through.
Yeah, no, it was great. There's so much about this episode that I really enjoyed. Obviously, we get the flashbacks to stuff that had happened in the past, including Spike's time in Italy in the 50s.
Oh, God, yes.
That's my favorite, like, 10-second scene, where it's just shot in black and white, and they're just like, ciao. It's so good.
But then it's also interesting kind of diving a little bit into the story of, oh, geez, Fred isn't around. Her parents show up. Wesley about to break the news, and then Illyria's like, let's have some fun. Let's be Fred for a day.
Yes, which maybe that will come back later. Who knows?
I wouldn't be surprised having that in the back pocket of, oh yeah, let's throw in some drama saying that your child died. But also the case of her exploring other things within humanity, and I wouldn't exactly say pushing Wesley's buttons, but kind of seeing where the supposed limits are, because Wesley is not happy about it.
Yes. Alrighty, so let's talk about some behind-the-scenes nonsense about this episode. Actually, let's do some trivia first, and then we'll get to the behind-the-scenes nonsense. So, what do we want to bring up here? I'm gonna... I love this correction that's on like the Buffy wiki, because it's such like a hyper nerd one that I have to bring it up. So Spike complains about the duster that he took from Nikki Wood being destroyed.
Yes.
And he says that he's worn it for over 30 years.
Yes, I believe so, though I believe it's the case of the time would have been shorter within when it happened.
Yes, this is where I go, actually, seeing as he killed her in 1977, he's been only wearing it for 27 years. God.
It also is a case that he probably rounded up in most cases, but yeah, that's understandable.
He said over 30 years, this is unacceptable. I had to.
Duly noted.
Andrew compliments Angel's jacket, which is amazingly terrible, but Andrew will then be seen wearing one in a issue of the Buffy Season 8 comic.
Duly noted. He has a supposed style.
He does.
Or he wants to follow trends that his friends are supposedly making.
Yes. So let us get into a little bit of the backstage, or not backstage, but like the behind-the-scenes stuff. So, for one, technically Buffy does not appear in this episode. I don't care. That isn't Buffy. I know we see somebody dancing in the club, but that's technically not Buffy, because that's another Slayer who is pretending to be Buffy as a decoy. This obvious
reasons, or
this is brought up in a comic later. It's not in this episode, but that is technically not Buffy. It's also because they couldn't get Sarah Michelle Gellar to do this episode, although apparently they didn't really try because she was shooting a movie at the time.
Nah, understand.
I think she was doing The Grudge at this point. I think it would have been The Grudge, because that was around this time, I think. They originally did plan on having Dawn. So instead of having Andrew at the apartment, they were originally planning on that for that to be Dawn. Which I think that kind of could have been interesting. But I also do like having Andrew come back, because, I like that character.
As it sits with Andrew, it definitely fits within both Angel and Spike sort of working with it, and especially at the end of the episode with him sort of saying, guys, you need to work on changing your things. Then he comes out in a tux, hair slicked back, opening the door to two girls. It's like, yeah, he's working on it.
Okay, I can't prove this, but I am like 99% sure that they are both Slayers and work for him. That is my headcanon, because that is something that Andrew would do just to piss off Angel and Spike.
It leaves me the question, though, if he'd have enough of the actual brain power just to actually mess with Angel and Spike in that sort of way.
He's done things like that before, and he's not, like, he's never been portrayed as stupid. He's a little goofy sometimes, but he's not an idiot.
That's true, and I definitely wouldn't say idiot, but I wouldn't exactly say social gracious for that. But I don't know, just with his specifics of the character that I've seen within past episodes and the bit of development that he's had within the series, it wouldn't immediately come to mind that that would be something that he would do. But nevertheless, it was hilarious.
Yes. Also, Andrew wears a Strong Bad t-shirt in this episode, which I immediately was like, ooh, I remember that.
I'm sad. I madly missed that.
I think it's only in like one or two shots where you can see it. But yeah, when they, I think it's when they first go to his apartment, he's wearing a Strong Bad shirt. And finally, let us go into the international titles for this episode. So, in Czech, it translates as Beauty and the Beast, which, okay, I guess.
Yeah, not really. That's kind of like taking an amazing title and slapping it on the episode, but this hardly has any relation to it.
Yeah, I don't know. In Finnish, it translates as Those Kinds of Girls, which, I guess, okay, maybe. In German, okay, this is going to maybe be confusing, but it's kind of funny. So the German title is actually in Italian. So for
because the episode's in Rome, so
yeah. So in Germany, the episode is titled Bella Roma, which translates as Beautiful Rome. In Hungarian, it translates to Rivals, which that's a pretty good title.
Now, as it sits, the two characters always at each other's throats going together and work on a mission.
And finally, in Russian, it translates as Passions Over Girls, which I don't know what that's kind of not a great title, but it also grammatically doesn't make a ton of sense. But that is that. So, did you have anything else about this episode, Dave?
No, as it sits, it's definitely nice, especially with how much we're kind of heading into the last season or last little bit of the season, that it still has at least time to fit in one more funny episode, especially with all the stuff, because on the whole, there's nothing really big that happens within this episode, aside from all the shenanigans that kind of go on.
Yeah,
it's just kind of fun to jump back, see a couple of additional characters, see things from there. This is definitely, especially with Darla. It was always nice to see Darla within that.
Yeah,
I'm trying to remember all the lines, but the one particular line that comes to mind is, the names are escaping me now.
But yeah, it is nice to see Darla and sorry?
Darla and Drusilla, that was it.
Yeah, it's nice to see them again for one last time.
Yeah, for that. And especially with one of Drusilla's lines was, Darla gets up and is like, come, dear, let's go ahead and have a bath. It's like, will you hold me under the water and whatnot? It's like, yeah, sure, why not? It's like, it's so Darla. And just, so nice to see them.
Yes. Now, next week we'll be discussing the second last episode, or the penultimate episode of Angel. It's a little episode called Power Play. Okay.
Oh boy, here we go.
The gang starts to have doubts about Angel's loyalties when he appears to have become very close with the Circle of the Black Thorn, an evil secret demon society, when Drogon, the Guardian of the Deep Well makes a startling revelation. The gang's fears that Angel has become evil seem to become validated.
Oh, joy. So that one thing from an episode back, it wasn't only just a little trigger thing for that. They're starting to go that route with things. Hooray.
Yes. Yeah, it's gonna get interesting, Dave. It's gonna get interesting.
Isn't it always with this particular series?
Oh, wait. Well, until next time, I'm Paul.
And I'm Dave.